Yeah. Anyway,
Recording in progress.
anyway.
There you go. Okay, so welcome back to the Lovecraft Easing podcast, everybody. Some new faces because we're talking to the editor. Today we're talking to the editor and, if I get this to work here, and several of the authors of this book, The Rack, which is a new anthology edited by Tom Deedy, who is with us. So hey, Tom.
Hello, thanks for having
Tom is the
us.
guy with the T-shirt there. So with the Rack T-shirt. So and yeah, I'll have my panelists introduce themselves real quick. If you're new to the podcast, I'm Mike Davis. We do this every Sunday at 6 Eastern. You can watch live or you can watch later. If you are watching live, let me know you can see us and hear us okay. And yeah, Pete, why don't you introduce yourself? Yeah, you're muted. You don't.
I
Jeez,
couldn't find a button.
Lord.
Sorry. It's been a while. Look, I've been not on for months.
Yeah,
because-
you went to see Stephen King's band, and then you got sick, right? That's what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. So
Miami
we went
Book
to
Fair.
Miami Book Fair. We sold a whole bunch of people, including Stephen King, Ridley Pearson, Dave Barry, Gregory Maguire, Tomiya Dayemi, Alex Astor,
Hmm.
just and Jeff Vandermeer.
Hmm.
And in the course of 48 hours, I picked up a bug, and that put me on my ass for 20 days.
Stephen King
So-
got you sick.
That guy.
It was
Yeah.
probably the music.
was it that bad?
Yeah,
Okay.
they cannot carry a tune. They cannot sing. They cannot play.
Well, you'll never
Um,
work in this town again.
Nope.
I'll tell you that.
But it was fun to watch. Basically, a garage band that only rehearses twice a year. Get up on stage and sing songs we all know.
Alan, you want to?
Anyway,
Yeah. Hi. Good to see. I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better at least.
yeah,
So
I'm not coughing up green stuff anymore.
it's good to know. Let me make a note of that real quick. Alan.
Hey, I'm Alan, a teacher, artist, and I pen the occasional update for the eZines movie and game page.
Yep. And Mark's here, and that's it for my panelists because the rest of them are sick still.
Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
I just had a Windows update on my machine, and it screwed up all my default settings. So I've been trying to make sure I can be seen and heard. I'm Mark Rainey, horror writer and editor, most recently of Death Realm Spirits, who one of your guests here was actually in Death Realm Spirits a while back. Now, if you hear me hollering loudly, it's because I went geocaching this afternoon up on a big rocky ridge that's covered in cactus, and I stuck my hand inadvertently into one of those nice little plants, and I must have 10,000 little hair-like needles all stuck in my hand, and I've been picking these things out for the last 3 hours and not doing too well.
Well, real quick, you and Pete, you've got a book that's available for pre-order. Mark, talk about that just real quick and where people can go. I think I have a link to it in the show notes, but I don't remember for sure.
Okay, I can post one for you. My upcoming book is The House at Blacktooth Pond, coming out from Crossroad Press in February, and it's sort of
fabulous.
Oh,
yeah, I read it. It's great.
I appreciate that. It's sort of a haunted house gone topsy-turvy story, and hopefully it will scare the pants off of you, although I can't really be responsible for your pants. I'm sorry.
So Google that, everybody, and pre-order that. Or Mark can put the link in the side chat here.
We'll do that.
And Pete, Cthulhu Heresy has been out, what, a couple months?
Yeah, Cthulhu Heresy's been out for a while. That's my collection from Weird House Press. But what dropped most recently was Where the Silent Ones Watch from Hippocampus, the
Oh, okay.
Hodson anthology,
Yeah.
which, you know, Sal and I are still reeling from that one because we got a lot of great press for that.
That's good.
So, yeah, we're happy.
Then let's introduce our editor and the authors that are here. We've got three of the authors from this anthology, The Rack, and that just goes to us. Mark doesn't go to the. You have to go on YouTube for that.
right.
Tom, can you introduce yourself real quick, and then I'll have everybody else introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about the book, if that works for you.
Sure. Tom Deedy. I'm a horror author. My first novel, Haven, won the Bram Stoker Award back in 2017, and I've since written several novels, novellas, short stories. This is my first foray into editing, and it's been a great experience so far.
Great. And why don't we go with Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Nunnally. I am one of the authors in The Rack. I'm also a graphic designer, and my next novel, The Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile, is coming out from, oh God, I almost said Chaos. It's not Chaos. It's Clash Books in April 2025 on the 22nd, which is also Independent Bookstore Week. So it is available for pre-order, and of course, all your locals would appreciate it if you did it there. Oh, and just real quick, in solidarity with Mark, when I was in the Marine Corps, I happened to dive into a bush of that type of stuff, and my hand got filled with all these little needles, and it was just, you're going to suffer for a long time. And
I gathered
You're gonna suffer, Rainey.
yeah. The same day, I actually I laid my hand on a hot machine gun barrel too. So one hand is burned, the other
man.
one was full of these little needles. It was pretty terrible for a while. So,
Wow. How long ago was this?
oh God, this was like 30 years ago.
30
now.
years ago? Okay.
I have a slight bone to pick with Eric, though, because I had to pay him money to be in Death Realm. I didn't get to just give him beer. If I had known that, you know, we might be having a different conversation.
I don't operate like Peter. I gotta get paid, man.
Eric, what's the name of that book again?
It's The Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile.
Okay. Maybe I don't think you can do it right now, but afterwards when the video is archived to YouTube, you can feel free to post it in the comments below the video if you'd like.
Sure thing.
And let's see. Oh God.
Oh God.
You seem to have let John in.
Oh God.
What?
Who let the door open?
John
This
Langan.
guy come from?
Change the link to this.
Yeah, I accidentally sent him the Zoom link. Yeah. I don't think he can hear us insulting him yet.
It's nice to see. It's nice to see all of you fuckers too.
John,
Holiday joy, courtesy of John Langan.
I'm sorry, but you know, we're allowed one F-bomb per episode, so there you go.
That is true. That's fucking
Just
true.
one?
Is that we as a collective or we individually?
It's
As a
individually.
collective. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules.
Well, you're just in time because I was about to ask Kristen to introduce herself to the audience.
Hello, I am Kristen Dearborn. I have a story in The Rack, which is the reason that I'm here. No, that's my friend Ember right there on the futon. I am a horror writer. My most recent book, Faith of Dawn, came out earlier this year from Cemetery Dance. If you like suicide cults and skunk apes, this would be the book for you. And The Rack is one of the coolest things that I have gotten to participate in. And every time I get to have a Rack discussion, it's just so much fun.
Yeah, Kristen had emailed me earlier in the week saying how much she was looking forward to this. So, and yeah, hey Larry, you want to introduce yourself too?
Sorry, yeah, I am Larry Hinkle, the least famous author you've never heard of. My book collection, my debut collection, The Space Between, came out in February, and I have a new novella called The Eris Ridge Trail. That's a cosmic horror road trip coming out in March.
Awesome.
And it's excellent.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
You do the same later if you'd like, Larry. Post the link in the YouTube
Okay.
comments,
I can do
or
that.
on the side chat if you're got two screens or whatnot. Hey, John, real quick, you want to introduce yourself, and then you've got some books coming up too, right? A couple of books.
Couldn't figure out how to unmute myself.
Yeah, it's going around. It's going around today.
Yeah, my wife wishes that she could figure out how to control that. As do my kids and pretty much everyone I know. Hi, I'm John Langan. I've written a couple of novels and some short stories, and I'm here to torment Mike Davis. And to admire Eric Nunley.
It's true. So, why don't we start with Tom? And what was your inspiration for the Rack? What was the genesis of this? How did it come about?
So my infatuation with horror began a long time ago when I was, I don't know, probably 13. Back when I was that age, every store you walked into, gas station, supermarket, convenience store, had one of those black spinny racks. And I would, go in there and look for my next book. And one day I went in and I pulled this baby off.
Mm-hmm.
That was Salem's Lot original paperback cover, and I just fell in love with it, and I knew that's what I wanted to do someday. So years later, here we are, and I don't know, I got to thinking I wanted to put out an anthology. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was thinking about that story and how, bookstores even aren't a thing anymore, and, you don't find the Rack anywhere, and, everybody just scrolls online looking for their next book, and I feel like people are missing out on a lot of the pleasure that I had, at least, spinning that rack and looking for a cool cover. They all had these crazy paperbacks from hell covers back then, and very lurid, and haunted kids and puppets and giant insects and all that kind of stuff. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do something that kind of harkens back to those days. And I invited 28 authors to participate, and everyone accepted, and every single one of them knocked it out of the park, and all the success goes to the authors for this. It's a great collection.
You know what you were saying about the pleasure of spinning the rack and so forth. There's no question that we have access online to perhaps a lot more books than back in the day, but I think about going to the video store, in the 80s and 90s. And sure, I can stream so much more today. I can look for a movie that someone tells me about it. I can be at home, search for it, and stream it. But I miss that experience of going into the video store and browsing, neighborhood spot and seeing what everyone else is getting and that kind of thing. So
It's like the stakes are higher when you've got the rack in front of you and you have to physically take something off of it and decide to bring it home. It's a different experience.
Yeah, it also goes to even music, right? Everybody streams music now, but there was nothing like going out and getting the latest album from your favorite artist, and they had, beautiful album covers and all the cool information in the liner notes, and you just don't get any of that anymore.
buying an LP because you like one song on it and you hope maybe there'll be some other songs that you like on it.
That's true. That's true.
So when you got the idea that you wanted to do this, did you know right away who you wanted to ask?
I had a good idea of a lot of the people I wanted to ask. Yeah, I knew a lot of people that I thought could write stories that fit. Others I kind of, took a shot with, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get what I wanted. But like I said, everyone came through perfectly. I wanted Grady to write the intro, but he's just really busy being Grady, so he couldn't do it.
Busy being Grady.
And I asked Richard Chismar if he could ask his buddy King to write the intro. And when he got done laughing, he said, no, but I can probably get you a reprint, which worked out great. And then it was actually Lynn Hansen that mentioned that Will Erickson did a lot of the research and co-writing for Paperbacks from Hell, and she hooked me up with him to get that introduction. That was kind of the hardest part, was finding the exact right person I wanted for that introduction, and he did a great job.
Yeah, yeah, you did. Um, did you ask John Langan?
John Langan, spoiler alert, will be in volume 2 next year.
Okay, well, better late than never. He's still muted.
Probably for the best. He already
don't make me drop my second F-bomb of the night,
can't.
Davis, and then the FCC or whoever will get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I'll lose my PG rating on YouTube and won't be able to make any money off this video. I think the authors who are here should talk about their stories, but also I'd like to hear about your experiences, spinning the rack, as Tom was talking about. Who would like to talk about one or both of those things next? Eric?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Boston. I live in Providence now, and I grew up in a like the southernmost part of Dorchester and Boston, Mattapan, and slightly less than a mile away was a place called Sonny's Cigar Store in Mattapan Square, and I would walk down there, and it was a spinner rack of comics. They had all the books, the books that they had was just on a like a wooden display shelf, but it was the comics on the spinner rack that I got enamored with. And to Kristen's point, like there's something about turning that thing, and it feels like, I think because it's circular, it feels like infinite potential, and trying to decide,
Yeah.
because you couldn't get everything on the rack, you had to figure out which one you could take home. And it was in grocery stores where I'd see the paperback racks, and same thing, you're spinning it and you're looking at these insane, ridiculous covers. And it was like, I always gravitated to anything that was sort of a mixture of science fiction and horror, like science fiction monsters and things like that. But I love that stuff. And that's what kind of led directly to the story that I wrote for the rack, The Keeper of Tazwamet. And it's actually the main character in that is the second time that I've written her. And she's an animal control officer, which, the potential for running into things that are completely out of control are high. And a childhood friend asks her to come down to Cape Cod. And he's an aspiring police officer, so he's pretty low in the sheriff's department, but he thinks that an animal has done some damage, and he wants her to help him verify. And things kind of spin out of control from there.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Eric, what's the other book that character appeared in, or story?
It was another short story. I wrote in 2014 or 2015. It was I wrote it as a promotional thing, so it was never never published by a publisher, but it involved dogs, people who do dog fighting, and chimeras. So somebody was breeding something they shouldn't have been with dogs. Things spiral out of control. And off we go. I want to do one more story with this character, and maybe one day collect them into like a novella. I love that pulp idea of having a number of short stories all being collected in one thing with the same character. It's not like one big story, but
Yeah.
I think you just don't see that often anymore.
No, you don't. Now that I think about it, you did see it a lot back in the day, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, when we had more magazines publishing things, then
Yeah.
you would follow in the magazine, right? You would see all that, and then eventually they would get collected into something, and you could pick up a little pulp novel or something with multiple stories. I mean, it's basically what Sherlock Holmes is, right? It's a bunch of short stories
That's
all
true.
smashed together. Yeah,
I've been rereading some of those lately.
they don't get
It's
old. It's
no,
crazy.
they don't. They don't. And they're very comforting reads, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
they really are.
I blazed through
Yeah.
them when I was a kid, and I've probably done it at least 4 or 5 times since I was an adult.
I
So
had one opportunity to write a mystery like that. I don't know if anybody else ever written any mysteries like somewhere along the lines of that? It's just all horror with you guys all the time.
Reanimatrix is a mystery with horror, so or horror with mystery. So it's based on Laura. So yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I was just about to mention, and one of the live viewers, Dan, says the paperback is in my Amazon cart now. Christmas vacation read. Um, if you're a Kindle person, it's available on Kindle Unlimited. If you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, and of course, there's the print edition as well. So,
Has it
Chris,
made it into libraries yet, Tom?
yeah, good question.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I guess I need to figure out how to make that happen.
What about, while I'm thinking about it, the swag, the T-shirts? Because this whole thing's so much nostalgia, you know. So,
Yeah, so when I was figuring out what to do for all the authors, other than pay them, of course, I had the pens and stickers, and I had some. I don't have any here, but I had like these author journals made, and then I got the files from Lynn Hansen, who did the cover, to have the shirts made. So these shirts, this is like the first shirt ever made. I just got the sample, so now I'm going to be sending shirts to all the authors as well. But I don't know. The cover is just so iconic to me. It's like she reached into my head and pulled out exactly what I wanted for this book, and she just nailed it. It's just perfect.
yeah, who did that cover for you?
It was Lynn Hansen.
Right. Okay, you said that.
Yeah.
The really cool thing about it is, for those who are just listening and can't see, there's a skeleton holding a copy of the paperback, so infinite there. But on the rack itself, there's some of the stories that are in the book. Gwendolyn's story, Ronald Malfi, Cynthia, Chismar and King. It's a pretty cool cover, yeah. So,
I want to riff off of what Eric was saying.
mhm.
That spinner rack, whether it's for comics or secondhand books, the some of the pressure there was that if you chose not to pick something up and tried to come back the next day to get it,
Yeah.
it's gone.
Right.
It's a good chance it was gone. Before we had comic book stores or even like Walden's in the local mall, there was limited supply. There wasn't like 20 copies sitting on the shelf. There was one, maybe two. So you had to buy it that day because it was somebody else was going to beat you to it. And hopefully it was your buddy, right? Because then you would all get together with the stuff you bought and trade it out. And there was the one guy that always bought DC, the guy who always bought Marvel, and the guy who, like the really freaky guy who bought Charlton comics.
Well, now
John
that I
does
think about this, the same applies to action figures, wouldn't you say, Alan? Like Fleischer, Supermans, things of that nature.
Yes.
I was the wacky Charlton.
And then
kid,
we look at Alan's background and see all the action figures.
Yeah.
We were at
it's
sorry, John, go ahead.
no. I was just going to say that. I mean, I know we're sort of diverting a little bit into talking about comic books, but
That's what we do here.
there were different, mostly pharmacies in my neck of the woods where you would find the comic book spinners or just the standing rack. And if you were lucky, there was a very lazy clerk who was in charge of that. And so if you missed an issue, there was a chance you might actually be able to find it because they would just sort of stack, sort of shove the new issues in front of the old issues. So you would get these, a short history of the local issues or the, the most recent issues, right? You'd be like, oh, here's the last 5 or 6 issues of this. I can pick these up, but as you said, there was also, you had a finite amount of money. And so it was like, oh, and then there was one very weird little store, now that I think about it, where they would have sort of lesser known Marvel comics or DC comics or whatever. You weren't going to, they would have Spider-Man, but when the Micronauts was losing popularity, they would have the Micronauts there saying, oh, that's right, go for the Micronauts.
Also, if you had a lazy clerk, you could read a couple of the comics before they noticed and not have to buy them. So
I
You can
always
hide on the
always
other side of the
wanted them.
rack.
Yeah, I always wanted the comics though, because I wanted the art. You know, I wanted to be able to just like sort of linger over the art and put tracing paper over it and trace it.
yeah,
And
reading it on the
honestly,
rack was the second best thing, no doubt. Yeah.
this also extend. I mean, we say it's books, but it also extended a comic, but it also extended to books. I can remember even in the 90s when supermarkets were like selling leisure paperbacks and romance novels. I bought my copy of Graham Masterton's Prey at a Publix because it was sitting there by the checkout. It's like the only Cthulhu Mythos book I've ever bought in a supermarket.
Pete, I worked at a grocery store as a teenager in the early 90s, and I got to know the jobber that stocked the racks. Do you know what they
Okay.
did? You know what they did with the books that didn't sell?
They ripped the covers off and threw them away.
And I have still, I
Oh,
think
that hurts to hear.
at my parents'
yeah.
house, I have boxes of books he gave me with the covers ripped off.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Sometimes they even went so far as just to take a hole punch and punch a hole in the cover to say that it had been discarded.
Yeah, and those are the ones the author didn't get paid for either.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see. I
Wow.
didn't know that when I was a kid, and there was a
Yeah,
place.
yeah, same.
Yeah.
I used to do the same.
Yeah, there was this elevated train that ran through part of Boston. It's gone now, but it created this really kind of dank, sketchy atmosphere all along one of the main streets through downtown. And there was a store there that was it was near where my father would work. And sometimes when I went to meet him at work, I would go into this store, and they had two giant boxes of books and comic books, and just dig through it to find things. But all the books had the covers ripped off, and I had no idea, and you're paying 10 cents for a book, and I discovered a number of authors that way, which it's really strange to think, once I got older, and I was like, Christ, that was very illegal. But
Yeah, see, I've seen that message in the front of some books, but I never realized that was what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, then they got wiser though and started sending affidavits instead of the covers of the unsold ones, so that they could do some really serious creative accounting that way. With Death Realm, when I was doing the magazine, the returns just piled up and up and up, and I guarantee you the accounting was very, very creative.
Kristen, you want to talk about your story, and do you have any tales of when you were younger, perusing the rack?
I can use the Tails microphone. So I feel very wholesome. The rack of my memories was in my library, and our library had a pretty decent horror selection. There were lurid covers. Piers Anthony Firefly was one that I checked out of my local library. But I definitely just remember spending a very long time in front of that rack trying to decide which one it was going to be. And with a library, it's not quite the do or die thing, because conceivably they all come back, but it still is a pretty agonizing choice. So my story in the rack is Ursa Deruo, and it is my bear story. I knew I wanted to write about teenagers dying because that's the kind of thing that I want to read about when I pick a lurid book from the rack. And so there's a bear, there's a twist ending. Gotta read it to find out what happens.
And there is something very wholesome about teenagers dying, right? Who we missing here? Larry, do you want to talk about your story?
Sure. I guess my first memory I have of the rack would be there was a little drugstore near our house called White's Drugstore that I grew up outside of Columbus in this little town called Groveport. And I remember once I would go there and I picked up two books that I liked, and I think they were like maybe like $1.75 each or something. And I went up there and I had a bunch of quarters, and in my head I had enough money, but because I'm a writer and I can't math, the lady told me I didn't have enough money, and I kept arguing with her, saying, "No, look, 50 cents and this and this and this and this," and she won. So I had to put one of them back, and I don't remember which one it was or anything, but I'm sure I put the wrong one back. But the first two I remember, the first two covers I remember are the Night Shift one with, the hand wrapped in bandages, and then James Herbert, The Dark, which was like this blue kind of demon-y sort of triangle shaped head. That was that's just such a good book. Oh my, just nonstop. My story is called That Chemical Glow, and it's about twin brothers who come back from the war, and they're both drug addicts, and the town they grew up in has been had a couple chemical spills, and it's been condemned. And one of the brothers gets it in his head to rob their drug dealer, and they get chased into the town through the barbed wire of where they grew up, and they find something there that the chemical has become, and they get recruited, I guess is a good way to put it. No teenagers die, but unfortunately, not in this one.
Tom,
Is it a horror story if no teenagers die? I mean,
it can be.
isn't that a prerequisite?
Tom, when you were imagining this anthology in your mind, how does it stack up to what we have now?
What we have far exceeds anything I could have imagined happening with this. I really, looking back, it was just like kind of a whim that I decided to do this. And, I said, maybe if I make my money back in a year and, some people get some recognition they deserve and it'll be fun. But it's kind of taken a life of its own, and it's doing really well, and people seem to love it. So I'm already in the planning stages of the second edition.
I do think obviously the quality of the stories, but the nostalgia factor has to have a lot to do with it as well.
I think so. I
yeah.
think so. Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about some of the other stories, just briefly?
Yeah, so one of the really cool unplanned things that happened with this, one of the other, let me back up a step, is having never put together an anthology before, I started reading about how you figure out what order to put the stories in, and there's a million different theories about how long the stories are, how good they are, who wrote them, as far as placement in the anthology goes.
I always thought it was just vibes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overthinking in it too, because after it came out, I was asking people, I'm like, do you even read the stories in order? They're like, no, I just pick what, the authors I know, and then I go back. And so in the end, I don't think it matters.
See, I
But
felt like I was being punished, being put after Stephen King's story.
There is the factor of these days, at least, on a Kindle book, because if you're not sure that you want to buy it, then you download the sample, and you've got a small percentage of the book, and putting perhaps what you think the story that would best represent the entire anthology might be a good idea too.
That's a great point.
Having people click that buy button, making that decision.
What worked out really cool for this was the first story is called Black Pages. Sina Palaio's story is Black Pages, and Clay's story is called White Pages. And it was just like the perfect bookend to the anthology. And her story is about basically the scariest book ever written that you should never read, called Black Pages. And then at the end, Clay's story, which is just fantastic. It's about kids making prank phone calls back in the 80s. And it's just creepy as hell. And then everything kind of flowed in between there in terms of putting it together. And like I said, I was very fortunate when Richard Chismar hooked me up with King's People, and I just said, hey, can I have a story for a reprint? And when they ever came back and said, here, have the raft, I was like, I couldn't have picked a better story to fit in this anthology than the Raft. So I don't know, everything, like I said, everything just really fell into place kind of magically during the putting together of this, and it's worked out great.
I've told Tom several times that he should spin how the raft wound up in here, and you should make up some, like, Stephen King saw you were doing this, and he's like, man, I've got this story that would fit perfectly with all these other ones. But will you take a reprint? You gotta spin it.
See, that's why I don't do like marketing. That is a better story.
Kristen
for
is
sure.
not wrong. Yeah, that's a missed opportunity there.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you were like in some kind of high stakes poker game with Stephen King, and at the end of it, he was like, I got no money," and you were like, "Listen, King, I'll make you a deal."
Listen, King, you hack.
Well, it's good that he's got this reprint in the anthology, though, because that'll get him some more recognition that he so desperately needs. So,
Well, and it got some more, spare change in his pocket that I'm sure he needs too. It is the most expensive story in the anthology, I can tell you that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I'm honestly, I'm thrilled to have it. That was kind of a big goal, was to have one of the real icons of that era to have a story in there. And I'm not going to say who it is, but I've managed to pull some more magic for volume 2. And there's an author whose books were very prominent on the rack back in the day, who's agreed to put a new story in for me. So I'm very excited.
Congratulations.
Well, that's fantastic. I was wondering if you had so besides Stephen King, if there were other authors of his generation that you had just tried to get for the rack.
I didn't for the first volume, everybody in it was a first time ask. There was nobody that said no. So far for the second volume, the only person that's declined is McCammon. But I'm hoping maybe if I make it to Nikon this year, I can sweet talk him into giving me a reprint or something, because he's a guest there. But yeah, I've got one really cool reprint from a long time, iconic author, and then one new story from somebody back in the day. So
about how long?
And then a bunch of other more newer people.
When will you be publishing the second volume or the sequel?
Probably late summer next year.
Okay.
Close to the same time. It depends on how everything falls into place, but maybe sooner.
2025.
2025, yeah.
Okay.
Summer to fall of 2025.
Everyone here, please continue to feel free and pipe up with questions or comments. I do want to ask the 3 writers who are here that have a story in the rack. When Tom came to you with this, in your mind, what did you think? Okay, what is the kind of story that fits in with this theme? And were there any concepts that you threw away? Or did you kind of go with the first idea you had, or did it take a little bit of thinking to fit into the theme? So whoever wants to go, Kristen, Eric. Larry?
Yeah, Tom and I are in the same writing group, so he read an early version of my story and liked it, and gave me some notes, and came back later and said, I'd like to put this story, I'm thinking about doing maybe an anthology. So if you could make this story suck less, I would like to maybe have it for my book.
The editors and their fancy editor talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That was some really good help there. Just make it suck less, Larry, and you're in. So I mean, in a sense, in that way,
That's what he said to King too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Since he came to me, in the beginning, in a sense, I'm kind of responsible for the rack. That was kind of my story that kind of kicked off the whole chain that went to this, just by making it suck less.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yes, it was a big help.
Kristen or Eric, you want to tackle that question?
I think when what I thought was when Tom reached out to me, first of all, I was honored and excited. to, be invited and to be included in something. It was just funny that if I'm remembering correctly, Tom wasn't sure if I'd experienced the 1980s or not.
I had no idea what your age. You should be happy that I didn't. I thought you were like in your late 30s. I really did.
Yeah, when you said 30 years ago being in the armed forces, I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't think he was that old. He
Yeah.
looks younger. So
I remember the 70s. So
Eric is like one of
Maybe
those.
clown.
He's like one of those Moorcock characters, who's just
Mhm.
like the eternal whatever, and he just kind of wanders
Yeah, so-
around. And
in some attic somewhere, there's a picture of Eric that's aging. I think.
yeah,
moldering away. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't
That's funny.
because of my I'm just deeply interested in I think Kristen's very similar in this way, and just really enjoying like monster stories and the harrowing adventures of dealing with something that no human being should have to go up against, and whether or not someone is successful in that or they come out extremely damaged or not is kind of up in the air right up until the end of the story. So when he said that, I was like, oh, perfect. This is exactly the type of thing that I enjoy writing. Yeah. So when he asked, it didn't take long at all for me to have the idea. And, I already had this character that I've been messing with. So I really enjoyed writing her, and continuing her story, at least for me. Like I said, it's not like everybody knew where that was coming from, but being able to continue with it was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, Kristen?
So we talked about it a little bit later in the process, Tom and I. So I had a little bit of a tight deadline. So I was kind of thinking, what is the rack story that I want to read? And teenagers dying obviously was my first priority. And so then I got started working on this story. It was about a summer camp after the Vietnam War ended, and it was going to be like MK Ultra mind control, sacrificing the teenagers to devils to fight communism. And so I'm writing, and it's like 5,000 words, 6,000 words, 8. And then I realized that this was not going to be the rack story. So I had to like pull the emergency brake on that and be like, what else am I going to write? And bears. And I'm happy to announce that I'm revising the MK Ultra Summer Camp novella that's 30-something thousand words, and puttering around with that and having a good time with it. So
Yeah, you blew past that 5,000 and 6,000 count.
yeah.
Mike,
Even
never throw anything away.
the story
No.
that's in here is even kind of long. So this prompt is very inspirational and exciting to me. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Tom, what would you write for the rack?
Good question.
Honestly, my story would probably be
Boys on Bikes.
What's that?
Boys on Bikes.
Dang it, I was just about to say.
Oh,
Kids
of
on
course
Bikes.
it's Boys on Bikes. That's my jam, but it would probably be set at an amusement park or a traveling carnival or something. More of my nostalgia kicking in. I don't know. I've got a bunch of creature stories. I have a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, this is pretty much everything I write belongs on the rack. So I'm not very diverse in what I write about, I guess.
I wish you could participate, but I kind of see why you may not be.
Yeah, that was kind of a tough decision. I looked at a lot of anthologies while I was researching, and I just didn't feel comfortable putting my own story in.
I think it's classier if you don't.
Yeah, that's the
But
right
I
call.
wouldn't hold it against someone who did.
Right, same. Yeah, I thought for me it was the right decision, as much as I really wanted to put one in.
Well, what you just said about pretty much all of your stories, excuse me, belong in an anthology like the Rack. If I'm out there, I'm in the audience as a reader, and I'm just hearing about this, I guess a question that would hit my mind would be something along the lines of, "This sounds great. What differentiates the stories that I might read in the rack with, say, another horror anthology that I scroll past on Amazon, and they're both going to be great, but what's the main difference or
You know
differences?
that it's a hard question to answer,
Yeah,
and I'm going to go back to your last question to kind of put it in perspective, because your last question about did the authors have the right story when I gave them the guidelines, there
right.
weren't really any guidelines to this, and most of the authors got it when I just said, "Hey, I'm just looking for a vibe." Like there's no
Yeah,
theme, there's no, like common evil in any of the stories. It's just I'll know it when I see it, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you've seen, stories from back in the day. I said, if you don't know what I'm looking for, pick up Paperbacks from Hell and flip through that, and you'll get an idea of it. So, um, as far as what differentiates it, I don't know. I think there's a quality to all the stories. Certainly the stories are all beautifully written, and they're all very different. I didn't get 10 haunted puppet stories or 10 giant praying mantis stories. I got a couple of each, and everything fit. But I think you nailed it earlier, where there's the mixture of this quality of writing with the nostalgia piece. Even though a lot of the stories take place in modern times, there's still, I can just call it a vibe. There's just a vibe to these
yeah.
stories that fit the Paperbacks from Hell / rack era just perfectly.
Uh,
I think that a lot of them were, well, definitely with the exception of Mercedes stories, a lot of them tend to be more pulpy feeling, which is what you got from
Yeah,
I would say
story.
camp. There's a
Camp's a good
significant
word.
amount of camp in this book.
absolutely.
In the most loving. I love
Yes.
that.
there's
Yeah,
your puppy.
several people have asked me about Mercedes' story. Um, and I've been honest with her, and I've been honest with everyone. It doesn't exactly fit in the rack like the rest of them do, but it is just such a beautiful story that I couldn't say no. I wanted that story.
Yeah. Uh,
But that there's this interesting idea, if we go back to what was on the rack and what we saw in the 80s and early 90s, is we saw what the Boogans and um Devil Spawn by Shoal, all the stuff that's in
Richard Lehman.
Paperbacks of Hell. But we also saw Anne Rice and VC Andrews, things that didn't fit with pure horror, more gothic, different kind of storytelling that didn't fit anywhere else.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
still doesn't.
I hate to agree with Pete on anything, but yeah, he's when you think about all the things that wound up on the spinner rack, there were certainly plenty of them that were smack dab in the middle of everything I guess we associate with sort of 80s style horror. But yeah, there were also, man, I want to say Douglas Clegg. I think I first ran into his
Yeah.
stuff
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
on the rack, and Doug is. I mean, there are ways in which he participates in a lot of the kind of excess, I guess you would say, like the splatter punks and that sort of stuff, but he also does some really crazy stuff. And so yeah, it seems appropriate to have what could be considered an outlier, because it allows the rest of the stories, like it allows the anthology itself to have a little bit of breathing room in a way.
Douglas Clegg, you're right, does fit in with that vibe,
Yeah.
and I have to say, whenever anyone mentions his name, how much of a fan I am of his novella, The Attraction. Do you guys remember that one?
Oh, I have a copy right here.
Yeah, mine's across the
Absolutely.
room over there. But it's just this really classic story. I think it was published in the 90s, but he starts off the story in first person narration, and he's talking about, go back to the 70s, and there were no cell phones or internet and all this stuff. And I just love that story. You know, the mysteries of the desert and so forth. So
Tom
Yeah,
has
Douglas
mentioned-
Clegg is funny because nowadays we kind of have a accessibility to all our favorite authors, and our fans have access to us through social media and all that stuff. But
yeah,
back then, these guys were just shrouded in mystery. A new book would show up and you're like, oh, I love this author, I'm going to buy his new book, but you never really knew much about them. But Douglas Clegg put out a newsletter faithfully for years, an email newsletter. And I used to just like wait for that thing to show up in my inbox because I thought it was so cool to be reading about like what an author does while he's writing a book, or just hanging out. And yeah, his newsletter was awesome back in the day.
it's funny that
He
you
did.
mentioned him because way before I did Lovecraft Easing and before really social media was a thing, from I don't know what 2010 onwards or so, it got really huge. I replied to his newsletters, I think it must have been 2006 or 2007, and said how much I enjoyed one of his books that I read, and said that I posted about it on my little blog at the time, and he replied with that's really great. I wish more people would, you know, talk online about the books that they read. And I think about that quite a bit today because that's exactly what we do a lot.
It
I'm sorry.
is.
Yeah, John, you were going to say something?
No, I was just another sort of anecdote was that
Yeah.
I discovered who he was through, I think it was an issue of Cemetery Dance that had an interview with him and an interview with Bentley Little. And I didn't realize at the time that those things apparently like talking to Bentley Little is apparently like hen's teeth, Brian Keene told me this long involved story about how he was going to have an interview when he was still doing the horror show with Brian Keene, that he was going to fly out to Arizona or wherever it is that Bentley Little lives and do an interview with him, and it just didn't happen. And it was funny, I had no idea from that interview that was Bentley's persona, I guess, or that was Bentley's preference. I mean, he's still publishing, still faithfully doing his thing, but it is unusual, isn't it, in this day and age, to have somebody who makes such a decision to just say, I'm read the books. I'm not going to whatever be out there.
Yeah, and speaking of him and Brian, they both fit into that rack vibe as well,
Yeah. I was going to encourage Tom. I think you really should pursue McCammon because
Excuse me.
back in the day, I mean, Nightboat,
Oh, all the Ball, Stinger, all
right,
those.
all
yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
But now
Yeah.
he's evolved so much further away from that
Right.
that it would be awesome to get him to go back and write something like that again.
That's true.
Look, his new stuff is amazing. It's super highbrow horror and dark fantasy. But I really long for some of that pulpy horror.
Oh yeah.
It
Oh,
certainly doesn't
remember,
hurt to ask. You
yeah.
can.
yeah,
All they can do
remember-
is say no.
Was it Nightcrawlers, which was adapted for the
Yeah.
second iteration of the Twilight Zone, directed by William
Yeah,
Friedkin?
that was really good.
Yeah, which was just an astonishing story.
I always
the other
thought back
person
then that Boy's Life, which is one of my favorite books, was such an
Absolutely.
outlier from what he usually wrote. And
but it marks the change in his direction.
I
yeah,
have my sweet new limited edition of it.
I'm jealous. That's one of my favorite
Nice.
books. I
So
definitely
cool.
think it's one of the best, maybe
Because that
20,
was, you're right,
25
there
books
was,
ever written.
after Boy's Life, there was Mine and there was Gone South. And they were definitely more kind of eccentric thriller kinds of.
Gone
kind of
South is a
feeling.
wild book.
Yeah, doesn't Gone South has the hitman, I think, and like his twin is like part of
Yes.
his, he's got like one of those parasitic twin things.
Right. Oh, it's so
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
I think mine is criminally underrated. I really like that one.
Yeah,
Oh, he's done Mystery Walk was great. Stinger was great. Yeah, there's so many good,
Stinger.
and he did go back to Yeah, I can't think of the character's name that he does all his like revolutionary books about now. But he
Matthew
did go back.
something.
What is it?
Matthew something.
Corbett, Matthew Corbett.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Listener. I want to say a few years ago, but it's probably like 10 years ago now, which was more of it's not really like the 80s stuff, but I loved it because he mentions the lady from Boy's Life. So if you mention anything about Boy's Life, I'm in. But
Yeah.
yeah, if it sounds like you guys are giving me permission to stalk him for a story, volume 2 is what I'm hearing.
Well,
Yeah.
it was someone said all they can do. Mark said all they can do is say no. I think. Oh, well, all they can do is say no or fuck off and get a court order or a court restraining order
That's
too.
right.
They can do that also.
How many
Listen,
times can he say no?
Yeah.
Tom, I'm just one word for you: misery.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
That's all I'm
yes.
saying. That's
Right. Have you seen my sledgehammer, Robert?
Just
Have you all noticed? So when I was growing up, I was kind of in a book desert. Like there was mention earlier of a friend picking something up and sharing it. Like I didn't have this network of people who read and would recommend things all the time. That's kind of how, you know, viral would be the word that's applicable today. How certain books went viral and everybody ends up reading them, and so there's a whole bunch that I didn't read. But I did watch a lot of movies, and it feels like now there's a bit of a revival of very 80s style movie making, and I'm wondering if you're seeing that in any writing. Uh, with the movies, it's pretty obvious. With the writing, maybe not so much. But is anybody seeing that in novels, short stories, and stuff?
I mean, Grady Hendrix and My Best Friend's Exorcism is a love letter to that. I feel like there are other ones that we can come up with.
Yeah, I just
Stephen Graham
finished
Jones
a book
is a
called.
fan. Yeah.
What was that, Eric?
Stephen Graham Jones. He's written
Yes,
novels
absolutely.
that fall into this category. So
Yeah, I just read one called Mr. Lullaby, which was I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but it's very reminiscent of that style. So yeah, I think it's a resurgence for sure.
just to quickly get back to Boy's Life for anyone in listening or watching that, if you haven't read it, one of the you should. One of the many genius things about it is, and I hope you guys agree, but there's an overarching plot to the whole book, but also each chapter is basically a short story.
Right.
But it reminds me of a TV series season, uh, in that way, but that I don't know, that kind of demeans a little bit. It's really such a great book.
Yeah, there's the underlying mystery of the man in the lake, but yeah,
Right.
each chapter is like a vignette with all this crazy stuff happening, but it
Right.
always helps to move along the main plot. It's genius.
I would say if you're a fan of King's It and Dan Simmons'
Summer of
Summer
Night.
of Night.
My holy trinity right there of
Yeah.
coming of age books.
Jeffrey Ford wrote one that I'm blanking on the title.
Shadow Year.
The Shadow Year. Yes, thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
this is so funny. Like this is among some of these titles are among several years ago. I just put a question out to my network, and some of you may remember this. I was like, what sort of seminal reads were there when you were growing up? And I made a list, and I started reading all these books just because there was so many references around me to these things and conversations that I couldn't quite follow. And Boy's Life was one of them. But one of the things I don't read a ton of Stephen King. Whenever I've started reading one of his novels, it sort of falls into this category. I've never really enjoyed these coming of age stories that involve a white kid in a small town. He's 'cause none of this made any sense to me. It was so completely removed from my experience growing up that I felt this distaste for coming of age stories, especially ones that have a white kid set in a small town, somewhere a little remote. So everybody knows everybody, and it's very quirky, and this, not to diminish the quality of the story or the interesting things that happen, but it just bugged the shit out of me because it was so far removed from my own life's experience. Ironically, that's what kind of drove me to write the next novel that's coming out, The Queen of Saturn and The Prince in Exile, because I hadn't read any coming of age stories that I enjoyed, and I was like, well, why don't I write one that takes place kind of where, in the environment that I understand and stuff. But ultimately, at some point, I got to force myself to sit down and read A Boy's Life, because, like you said, I know it's like a series of events throughout this kid's life, who he's chronicling these things as he goes, and he's really someone who involves himself in the goings on around him. He takes an active interest and takes an active role, and I'm sure it's very good. But man,
Well,
can't take it.
I would never pretend to understand where you're coming from, but I can empathize and see why, that's just not my thing. And it makes me really want to read your book. So I can't wait till it comes out. So,
Well, I thank you, and I hope you enjoy it. What's his name? Paul Tremblay. It was around the time that Bracken McLeod's book Closing Costs had come out. And it was Closing Costs is about a home invasion.
I was
And
thinking of Paul with what you just said. Yeah. Yeah.
you must have heard this little
Yeah.
conversation because Paul,
he told me. Yeah.
okay, yeah. He's like, I'm really not into home invasion stories.
Right.
And of course, he writes one that has been
Right.
adapted into a movie. And like his whole thing was like, I should write one that I would enjoy. And I found that to be very helpful writing advice. Like, if you don't like something, then write the type one that you would enjoy. And it's kind of paid off a few times. So
What is the title of your book again, and when exactly is it coming out, Eric?
The Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile. It's coming out April 22nd and next year.
Okay. Is there a pre-order link yet?
It is available for pre-order. I could drop it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'll yeah, that would be wonderful if you would do that. So, is it going to be a print and Kindle?
It'll be print and Kindle, yes.
Okay, awesome. I was also going to say, just back on the rack vibe, Richard Lehman fits in that lurid,
Yes.
very lurid
Yes.
vibe too. A lot of that to me got really old really fast, except that I love his story, Night in the Lonesome October, which is obviously extremely different from Zelazny's Night in the Lonesome October, but it's a pretty interesting story. The rest of it I was going to say take it or leave it, but probably leave it.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Mike. His I don't know, there was a lack of like character development, and I don't know. It was a lot of his stuff was almost violence for the sake of violence, and it just didn't work for me.
It's essentially proto splatterpunk, right?
Yes.
It's the start.
Not only that, but just, I mean, we're all human and we're sexual creatures, but my God,
Yeah.
dial it back a bit, man.
Yeah.
But and right up there is Rex Miller,
Oh yeah,
the Slob series.
Slob.
Yeah.
I don't think I've read those.
You don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
Wasn't worth it.
You'll
Yeah,
never get
and
those hours
I
back, right?
I think that those, because okay, on the one hand, I think that was also when Charlie Grant was writing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was also would have been another one of those paperback originals. You would have found things like The Pact or The Nestling there,
Yeah.
and those were in very restrained in comparison to what like Lehman was doing or
Quiet
what Rex
horror.
Miller was doing. But I also, what is that saying? If something is worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And maybe that's not the best aesthetic to practice, but sometimes there's a part of me that does kind of respect that. It's like, okay, you've got your whatever immortal serial killer chain gang. Let's see how far you can take this thing. And
Too much is not enough.
yeah, and look, sometimes, I mean, you know, the thing is, you take the chance, and sometimes you fail, or it's not as successful, and not to everybody's taste, or whatever. But I'm you know, not a huge layman guy. I know Coyne has very, you know, great affection for him and his work. So different strokes, everybody their taste, all that sort of stuff. You know?
But that vibe that you're talking about seems to be a huge, it's a big aspect of stories from the 80s. Stories, movies, all
Yeah.
kinds of media. Like,
Yeah.
just really taking the endings of so many movies and books and, you know, short stories from that time period is so completely bonkers.
Yeah.
And it just off the hook, like just really just pedals to the metal. Nobody knows where the brakes are.
Right. No, every woman who's in one of those movies is like, I need to be naked very quickly. And what
Yes,
is it, Return of the
maybe
Living
applied a
Dead?
little too much to certain aspects of
Yeah, you know,
storytelling,
it's
but, you
they
know,
just yeah, Return of the Living Dead. Remember when, I can't remember the character's name, and she's like, I want to dance naked in the cemetery.
right.
All right, that's,
Who says
you
that?
know, it's
These are
as
Oh, it's a pajama
as
party.
one-
Everybody needs to take their top off. Like,
You
Right,
leave
every-
Linnea Quigley alone.
You know, I didn't know I was going to ask this question, but so it's kind of off the cuff, but who would you guys, if racks were still spinning today, writers working today, where would you think, oh, I'll find his paperback there?
Ramsey Campbell.
Yeah. And maybe
Ramsey.
maybe Malfi. Right?
Definitely. Malfi,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. That guy is so prolific, man.
So good too.
Yeah.
You know, this is Joe Lansdale.
That's
Mhm.
true.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
absolutely.
think there would be a whole series of Joe Lansdale pulp novels, not the good stuff. the not the stuff that's marketed to the mainstream publishers.
Joe's
the
going to
stuff
see
that's
this later and be like, fuck you.
I don't
Alex."
care. Yeah. I would expect a full run of like a 6 issues of 6 versions of the Popcorn King novels. And
Right.
Joe's story in Death Realm was the classic pulp tale.
Yeah.
Oh,
Love
I
it.
think you would have had like Joe doing what was that? Mac Bolan, the Executioner.
Oh,
you know,
God,
I
there were
love
a whole-
those.
a
I
whole
love the
series
Mac
of
Bolan's
those,
books.
You know?
yeah, he has
He
some
did a whole bunch
crazy
of those.
ideas. Yeah, he doesn't hold back. Even the titles are crazy. It's like, what? Okay.
The Elephant of Surprise. Yeah, that might be my favorite. Yeah.
Joe, his collection that he put out recently, what was the name of it? It was the God of the Razor collection. Was that
Yeah.
the actual name?
No, but
remember.
I know what you're talking about.
He had a
Yeah.
Lovecraft
Yeah.
anthology come out too.
Yeah.
But in the introduction, he said his favorite God of the Razor story he couldn't reprint, which was my introduction to the God of the
Night
Razor.
Runners. Was it Night Runners?
No,
it's
it was
the
not.
Batman.
It was
Okay.
Subway Jack in
Okay.
a Batman 1989, came out in 1989 around the time of the movie, and it was a Batman anthology. And he did a Subway Jack,
right.
Batman meets Subway Jack in that. Meets the God of the Razor, excuse me. And it is such a great story, you know. And Joe Lans, he really he understands Batman. You know, he really does. So I don't know how I got over there, but I did.
It always comes back to Batman with you. It's
it
always
does.
like, let me talk about Batman again.
Well, hell,
MR James really understands Batman. Yeah.
we were in the hospital. We
No
were in the
one gets
hospital.
Batman like H.P. Lovecraft.
We were in
No,
one of the
MR
waiting
James really-
rooms at when Laird was in the hospital, and we were both talking about Batman. You said something that I really, really liked about Batman, that he should never. He should be so good that he's never even hit. You know, to hell with all these scars on his body and everything.
Yeah, oh God, you're dragging me into it, Davis.
I am.
But yeah, I think that the whole like the brutalist Batman that's really has really ruled since Frank Miller's days I would chuck all of that. I would chuck all of that. A long time ago, God, I hate to quote John Byrne, but he was talking about how he thought that like Batman was like the happiest guy around because like, he gets to do like all of us have our fantasy jobs, the things we most wish we could do. Batman's doing his. And yes, his parents were killed and he's still dealing with that trauma, but like he's got oodles of money, you know. So yeah, I would have Batman as just nobody's even sure that he's real.
Right.
Maybe there's a certain point, you know, where he that's changed, but all of it would be you can't afford to get hit in the head a lot,
No.
really at all, if you can avoid it, right? So why would he be taking punches if he doesn't have to take punches? It would all be like ninja, real. I
Well,
guess
you remember
I
in
think
the
ninja
you
stuff.
remember in the Watchmen movie, John, and I may even have said this then, but when the owl guy, I forget his name, and Lori,
Night is it
Night
Night
Owl.
Night Owl,
Night
that
Owl? Yeah, yeah.
they're walking through the town for some reason I can't remember, and this gang follows them into the alley,
Right.
and he just looks at her. They just look at each other like, "Oh, well, okay, I guess we're gonna do this." And he tucks his glasses away, and they beat the crap out of them, and nobody lands a punch at all. They're
Right.
both so good, as are the other costume superheroes, that it's almost that like they have superpowers because they're so well trained. And that
Rorschach in the prison
Oh my
right.
God, that was awesome.
It just
So when you said that about Batman, I was like, yeah, that's exactly the way he should be, like that alley scene. Nobody
Well, I
can
think it's
touch
just
him.
it's superhero comics. A lot of them, right, these days, I feel like are power fantasies. Like there's always been that element of it. I'm not saying that, but they're and the art is amazing, right? But
Yeah.
they're just like the humanity. Um,
Yeah.
and I miss
And
that in a
it's
lot of it.
it's hard to get a very thoughtful story with Batman because of not only the brutal aspects, but you know exactly what you're talking about, John. It's like I feel like the best Batman was the detective, like who
Yeah.
Yeah,
actually
absolutely.
dealt with a mystery and unraveled it because no one else could. Not necessarily that just, you know, ran around kicking people's asses and
Yeah.
extracting confessions. It's like that just seems, you know, that's a blunt object, and he's supposed to be a scout. Well, I think he's
Well,
supposed
I
to be a
remember in the
No, I
80s,
agree with you.
there are
and it
there are
took so
actually
long to get that Batman on screen, shockingly.
Yeah.
He's a terrible detective in that last Batman movie, which I thought was great. It's like
Yeah.
yeah, you got to be better, buddy.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's not enough just to beat people up. It's
yeah, I remember there are still stories like that though, Eric, and I remember even in the 80s, when I was introduced to the Question in a comic where he meets Batman, and he says something like, "I thought you know, swung around town and beat the crap out of criminals." And Batman replies something like, "Occasionally I do. That's about 3% of what I do. The other 97% is finding out things, you know." So,
yeah. There's a God, I ran across this. I do not remember the context, but it's an issue of Batman from probably the late 70s, early 80s, where he literally just like walks into the police station late at night, and whoever the desk officer is, Batman's like, "Yeah, I need to check the files for this case." You go, "Sure, Batman, you go." And so Batman's just sitting with the police files, like trying to figure out, oh, you know, and it's so different from what we had. I didn't exactly like it, but I was like, man, this is a really different view of this character and what this character does.
the character that I think you're describing is Vic Sage,
yeah,
the Question.
yeah, it is.
He's assumed that role. Very little physical contact, only when it's necessary. And but you know,
I think
Well,
he's
back in
dead
the
though.
80s when he
I
started,
think they killed him off.
yeah, I think
it depends on
when-
what
yeah.
canon
I
is
know he'll be
these
back.
days.
Don't get me wrong. They'll reboot the universe again.
But when
Didn't
when
Renee
he's when
Montoya
his
take
series
up the-
started in '86, though, the very first frame, he's looking forward to beating the crap out of everybody in that bar, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is what we do, Tom. In this podcast, we meander all over the place. So
It's your show. You can do whatever you want.
Tom's getting an idea for his next anthology.
I do want to tell. I gotta go, but I
Yeah.
want before I do, I want to tell this story. Because Eric talks about being in a book desert.
Yeah.
My parents used to take me every 3 weeks. We used to go to the Horsham book exchange, the book swap, and like we would trade out our books, and and we always had stacks of books to read, and always trading out and always getting new stuff. But the place that I'm most fond of is probably one of the smallest bookstores I've ever been into. Was only about 6 feet wide. It was on the Ocean City, Maryland boardwalk. It was only about 6 feet wide and was probably about 30 feet deep. And it was nothing but spinner racks along one wall. Because, yes, they could put in shelves, but the spinner racks gave you more space because you could stack like 3 deep, and then you could, then you had to spin. So yeah, it was just an amazing little bookstore, and you never knew, because it was a holiday place, you never knew what you were going to find there. And that's the joy, I think, of not only spinner racks but also of used bookstores. You never know what you're going to find because you never know who dropped off what.
Yeah, it's like gambling. You don't know if you're going to do well or not, and when you do, that dopamine kicks
Yeah.
in big
Mhm.
time, buddy.
Yeah. Because I do a lot of I go to a lot of bookstores, and people say, "Oh, what's your favorite bookstore?" And it's like, well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a bookstore that knows exactly what they have and has it really well curated and has fair prices? Or do you want this bookstore that has no clue what they have, literally is selling books by weight, and probably has like 3 layers of human detritus on on top of everything, and there's a little bit of mold in the back corner. Those are very different bookstores, and I love them both.
Yeah.
And they both take advantage of spinner racks, and it's an amazing sort of industry that's slowly dying. But I think it might be coming back.
It's kind of making me want to rip out the bookshelves here and just build a house of spinner racks.
I tried to buy one. They're like $300.
Oh my God.
Really?
They're insane. Because there's
Look at this bad boy.
Of course, Tom's got one.
Tom, how
I
much did you
just
pay?
found this to bring to events after I published the rack. I found it on
Nice.
Amazon.
Oh,
That is
nice.
awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, I gotta go, guys. I'll talk
See
to
you,
you
Pete.
later.
Thanks.
See you, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
I want to start wrapping up too, but before I do, is there anything else we want to say about the rack that maybe didn't get mentioned that should, or did we cover it all? I guess we covered it all.
Well, I don't think we talked about the cosmic horror aspects of our stories.
Yeah.
Did we?
No, I don't think so. Not yet. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
It's so on point for the Lovecraft easy.
Right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, we even talk about cosmic horror occasionally here.
Yeah, I don't do that, right? It's one of those things where for instance, I was asked to write a story for an anthology by a South African publisher, and they're like, okay, and we're looking for weird horror, and I'm like, nah, I don't do that, but they're paying, so yes, I will do that. And then it was like, well, and also we want that story to be set in the 19th century or earlier, and I'm like, yeah, I don't write stories in the past, but they're paying, so sure, I'll do that. And it was somewhat the same with this, but I'm not terribly into weird horror or the Cthulhu mythos. There are authors whose stuff I enjoy that deals with it, like John Goodrich writes in the stuff, and he's very well versed in it, but he doesn't do that exclusively. But I always consult with him, and for this story in the rack, I was like, hey man, I need something aquatic, like a shell type thing. Is there anything in the mythos that has that? And he was able to dig up a reference to sort of a sea-based, one of these sea-based old gods that that had sort of very crustacean type thing. And I
Dagon or
wove
something.
that into the story as an animal that this animal control officer ends up encountering. And I had some fun with the whole kid in a small town, who's enjoying his summer and all that stuff. So yeah, so that was the tie to the Cthulhu mythos. And there's also a worshiper, of course. There's somebody who's completely unhinged that has no real understanding of what it is that they're helping. And of course, everybody always thinks they're going to be the favored one. It never works out as expected.
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, it was a great idea for a anthology, Tom. It really is, and I'm looking forward to volume 2.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I hope you and the writers will come back for that. So
Absolutely.
if you want to do it after today's experience, I mean.
I better study up on my Batman before.
Hey, we were pretty low key. We were pretty low key tonight, man.
Yeah. Hey, a couple things, just because I'm a geek. There's a recent Star Trek book out that I'm reading. It's called Lost to Eternity. And speaking of nostalgia, Star Trek 4. Remember when they go back in time to 1986?
To save the whales.
Oh,
Exactly, to save the
To
whales.
save the whales.
There be whales here.
There be whales here. Well, it's set in 3 time periods: 2024, and it's set in what is it, 2268, in the 3rd year of the 5-year mission, and then it's set. The 3rd time period is right before Star Trek 6, I think. So there was something that I never really thought of with that movie that the author does brilliantly in this book, which is you've got a woman a woman and 2 whales with tags on them, no less, who just ups and disappears from the face of the earth. And what tracks were left, and so this woman in 2024, excuse me, is doing a true crime podcast. So she's looking back almost 40 years later, saying, what happened to this woman, this Jillian, I forget her last name, who disappeared in 1986.
Oh, Mike, please tell me there's like a detective whale too.
No, there's no detective
Who's
whale.
like, what
I'm
happened?
sure
Where
it'll
did
be
they
in the
go? Except it's
sequel.
all in like high sort of pitched.
But in one scene when she's interviewing a detective that was looking into Jillian's disappearance, he talks about there is one weird thing. We couldn't find anything, no clues where she went. But there is one weird thing in this park in 1986. After she disappeared, there was this huge indentation in the park, and they can't figure out what it is. Of course, it's the Klingon bird of prey pushing the soil down 3 feet or whatever it was. But it's an interesting storyline. I'm really enjoying it. So.
Has anybody seen the first 2 episodes of Creature Commandos?
I've seen that.
Not yet.
Yeah, highly. I was surprised at how much I liked it. It's more Frankenstein and the Agents of Shade, that short-lived comic book. It's really more that cast of characters crossed with the Suicide Squad. But Gunn is a sharp writer, man, especially with like a large cast of characters. And he can just pivot, I feel like, from things that are just like incredibly funny, like inappropriately funny, to things that are actually really, really moving. So
James
I
Gunn.
think G.I. Robot's going to be the Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is that a Nazi? G.I. Robot just lives to kill Nazis. And my God, I can get behind that.
The rumors are not good on the Superman movie, though. So hopefully it's false. But,
how can anything with Mr. Terrific fail?
What's that?
How can anything with Mr. Terrific in it fail?
That's true. He's like the 2nd or 3rd smartest man in the DC universe. So, okay. One last thing on TV shows. is it just me, or is there anyone else who I just don't get The Walking Dead? I can't get through any of it. Okay, it's not just me.
I gave up on that so many years ago.
Yeah, I feel like I stuck with it longer than I should have.
Same.
I watched
Yeah.
all of it, but the last
And
few
aren't they
seasons
still
were
doing
hate
spin-offs on the
watching.
damn thing?
Well, that's the
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
When it started, I couldn't get all the way through episode 2 of The Walking Dead. So I temporarily got Netflix for something else I can't remember, job related. And so Fear of the Walking Dead's on there, and I'm like, I'll give this a try. And earlier today, I got to episode 2, and I'm just like, these people, I'm not rooting for any of them, and there's zombies being created everywhere, and they're all taking these slow, dramatic pauses. And nobody's, there's no sense of urgency or anything. It's just, have you guys watched
The
any of
comic book, I read the first, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 collected
Yeah.
of Kirkman's comic. And what was really in retrospect, what was really great about the comic was that there were no flashbacks. People, and it's funny because it took me a while to figure this out, probably much longer than it should have. Characters would show up and they would monologue. They would say, well, this is what my story is. But there was never like a flashback to see them. So everybody was just presenting themselves as, hey, this is who I am. This is what happened to me. And you had no idea who they really were. And in some cases that went seriously awry. But it felt, at least those early issues felt much more kind of organic in some ways. Like, oh, when we didn't know what caused that was never addressed. Where did the zombies come from? That was never addressed in the comic. And
That's pretty cool, though. I like that.
yeah, I think that it felt much more granular, much more ground level. Whereas I think you put things on TV and it's just, you put them on a screen.
I will say that season 3 of Fear the Walking Dead is the best season of any of the shows.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
that one
there's a lot between
season.
here and there to get to season 3.
I was gonna say,
it
is it something
is.
you can skip right to, or do you really need to know what happened before?
You don't. Yeah, it's just it's zombies. You don't need
It's
to know.
zombies. You don't need to know anything. Yeah.
The first,
Well said, Larry.
omnibus, the first omnibus of The Walking Dead is actually really good. The second one is just okay, and I think it's a pretty good example of the type of story, the type of things where if you have a comic that has an idea and sort of a serious direction, it can really only go so far.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be perpetual. You can't constantly do something for years and years and years and years and years, like every month. It
But
has
his
to end
thing-
somewhere.
Yeah.
Kirkman's thing when he wrote The Walking Dead was that he said that he was tired of like, this is how the zombie plague started. And he wanted to write about the minutia of living in the post-zombie
Sure.
world. So
He did that.
He sure did. It just felt like it turned into, both in the comic and in the show, just like an exercise in cruelty for cruelty's sake.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have no problem with violence and real nasty stuff, but when I'm like irritated with the violence because it's kind of boring,
Yeah.
I don't want to be bored watching violence. That's unpleasant.
I think with the I mean, and I don't remember where I stopped with the comic, except I remember thinking that you had this pattern of they would run into these other people, these other societies that had been set up. And it was always kind of the same thing. Oh, it seems really good to start with. Oh no, it's terrible.
Cannibals.
And, yeah, oh, they're cannibals, and it was just like, okay.
For me, it was like there's only so many hands you can lose and so many eyes you can lose, and
right. So many
just
children
lose your will to live, and it's like I just wanted these characters to finally die. Like,
So in other words, it's not just me.
If you must continue with the universe, you need to introduce new characters, and I know that's not always going to be successful, but maybe
I think there's.
I think worst episode of Last of Us was better than any episode of Walking Dead.
Yes.
And there's God, it seems to be my Brian Keene day, but Keene did a comic book called The Last Zombie. And it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's really good. I think it's as good as, like, Lock and Key or whatever. It's really hard to find. I paid too much money. I mean, it wasn't too much money because I really enjoyed it, but I mean, it was expensive to find the omnibus edition. But that actually manages. It hits a lot of the familiar tropes, but because it ends. Those things work. They gather a real kind of weight.
Yeah, that's a good point. Darren said on the live chat, Mike doesn't like zombies, and that's true, but I tried. I tried with Fear the Walking Dead, and I failed again.
There's so many better, though. Like honestly,
yeah,
there's so many better kind of lower budget zombie movies. There's like Fido, where there's been like some kind of zombie uprising, and we're sort of like in post like 1950s territory, and Billy Connolly plays a zombie who has been domesticated, and is developing a relationship with his I don't know what employer, human. There's one called Zombie Honeymoon, which is super low budget, about this sort of hip young couple, and they're on their honeymoon, and then a zombie comes out of the ocean and just vomits all over the guy, and the movie, I mean, it's an illness movie, I suppose you could say, because he's sort of slowly turning into a zombie over the course of the movie.
I think like Shaun of the Dead is one of the top 3 zombie movies of all time.
Yeah.
It's
John, you made me think of a zombie movie that I watched a few years ago that I actually did like, called It Stains the Sands Red. Are you guys
I've
familiar with
heard
that?
of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the one? Wait, is that the one about the woman who's being pursued by the
Yes.
zombie across? Yeah. I thought that was okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, is it at the end of it she turns into Rambo?
I can't remember the end.
like there's this. It's this very like she's just, this zombie is pursuing her, and she's trying to get away, and the zombie is just relentless, and they're out in the desert, and she doesn't know where she is, and all this kind of stuff. And I still like the ending. But like, talk about 80s cheese. Like most of the movie up to the ending, you're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then you're like, what the hell is this? But it's also
it's
kind
2016
of
that too,
yeah.
with 80s cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I want to get you guys' opinions on this, writers and editors and everyone here. I saw on Facebook today, someone shared this, says that 99-cent sales are demeaning to writers. What say ye? And I wrote, it's, just being a student of marketing for years, I wrote, it's better to sell a lot of an item at a lower price than to sell less of an item at a higher price, because you reach more people. What you guys have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I saw that a few days ago, and I just don't understand it. You're looking to reach as many people as you can, and
and they like your story that they bought for 99 cents, so maybe they'll buy your book that's $7.99.
Every product under the sun is going to have sales on it from time to time. Like now, Crossroads put Blue Devil Island up for 99 cents. Like, does that insult me in any way? No.
Nope.
Yeah.
Only having one book, I don't really have much to say. I'm happy if anyone buys it at any price.
Right.
John, any thoughts? I mean, I've gotten all your books on the
think,
black
Mike,
market
as you
for
know.
free.
No, I think there's an I feel this feeds into this illusion, right? That you're going to become rich from the sales of your book.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you're not going to make any money at all, but it's the more people read your book, I feel, the more chances there are that they're going to recommend it to a friend. And
Exactly.
that a bookseller. So basically, you're encouraging word of mouth. And I mean, I will say, I wish as an author there was a way that you could write that off on your taxes. You could say, well, I sacrificed or this much money went towards marketing, basically, because it seems to me that's kind of the equivalent, right? We're gonna give this thing an 80% markdown to try to sell as many copies and boost our presence. there probably is some creative accountant who could do that, you know. So if you're listening to this podcast, please get in touch with all of us, because God knows we could use it.
I thought of this just now, but Doug at Bad Hand Books recently priced Laird's new collection at 99 cents, and it's really Laird's reaching a lot more people. It's really done a lot of good for him.
Oh my! I just finished that this weekend.
Yeah,
and
not a speck of light.
Tiptoe is one of the best short stories I've ever read.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an astonishing story. Yeah,
Oh,
Absolutely.
so good.
I don't know if it's still 99 cents, but everyone needs to read it. Not a speck of light, his latest collection, but it's done a lot of good for Laird. So
yeah, 8,000 copies sold, I think.
Yeah.
I think Doug said, you know, so which is not bad for a short story collection from an independent publisher.
yeah. So
Yeah, nobody really knows how marketing works. So anything that works, everyone's
well,
going to
I know this. The person who bought, for example, Laird's collection at 99 cents and never heard of him before, never read him before, and said, wow, this is great. Now they're going to go look for his other collections at higher prices, you know? So,
And I also think to Eric's point, I mean, and I've said this many times before, that, you know, Paul Tremblay and I, you know, chat about once a week. And I feel like we spend, you know, half of every conversation, like, you know, trying to figure out, how does this thing work anyway? And we have no idea. You know, like you throw up these different, what about this or what about that? But then there's this exception to that rule. You know, it's so yeah, 99-cent sales. Why not? What the hell?
yeah.
I think Dingus Doodoo, or whatever the guy's name was that started that thing up,
Dingus dude.
he was just talking out his ass. I mean, I thought it was a ridiculous thread, really.
Yeah.
where else would Dingus Doodoo talk from?
I don't respond to much like that on social media, but I was just like, you know,
You were like, Dingus Doodoo, hang on a second.
exactly. I just thought, you know, it just seems like common sense that if you want to reach more people, and this is one way to do it.
He was
So.
the worst Batman villain ever. No one would take him seriously. Dingus Doodoo, Batman, and Batman was like, "Come on, really? Seriously?"
Almost as bad as that Firefly guy, you know.
He was like, "I'm gonna let like the question handle you or something like that." You know? Random guy on the street. You want to beat this guy up because I can't even. You know?
Batman doesn't take the question seriously. Yeah.
You will not mock Dingus Doodoo.
And if you get nothing out of this podcast today, then you will have spent your time wisely.
Well, what's really going to get all of us is when the Batman 2 opens and the villain is Dingus Doodoo, and we're all going to be like, "Mother, come on!"
Yeah, and we're all named in the lawsuit.
Exactly.
Well, in that case, this is John's show if that happens, and if not, it's my show.
No, we're suing them, Mike. We're trying.
Oh, we are. Okay, all right,
yeah,
gotcha.
because we have the photograph, the.
In that case, it's
video
definitely my show.
recordings. Yeah, the digital evidence that Dingus Doodoo was originated here.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. This was a really fun conversation, and yeah, check it out, guys. It's The Rack, and edited by Tom Deedy, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited and in print. So,
Yep.
So yeah, and what are we calling it? A sequel or volume 2 in 2025?
Volume 2.
Volume 2.
Electric Boogaloo, The Rack 2.
The Reckoning.
The
Reckoning.
Reckoning.
You need to get the textured or cut out cover.
We need a cutout for
I
sure.
don't know
Yeah.
what the cost is on that, but
It doesn't matter. It's got to happen. It's got to happen.
And
Yeah,
if
cut out.
Listen to all these Gen X jokes, just pop, 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 pop,
Yeah.
pow.
and I'll gladly buy a pin or a T-shirt, Tom, if they become available. So I'd love one.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, thanks to everybody for watching. Thanks for listening. Especially thanks to my Patreons. If you're a Patreon or if you're not a Patreon, Mike DeBronzo and I did a Patreon episode the other day where we talked about our favorite horror movies from 2024, and it was a really fun conversation. So when you listen to that, if you value our opinions at all, which is questionable, write down our horror
course, it's all
recommendations.
just
Thank
talk
you,
about
Eric.
that.
You're never going to be
It's all,
invited again.
it's all talk about Batman. That's the thing. Is they spend about 5 minutes like this, like that Batman villain.
Let's see now.
And then
All the
they're just
Batman
talking-
movies were in 2024, right? Okay, let's talk about those.
Keep that up, John. I'm going to need some royalties there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for watching and listening, and hope you have a great night.
Take it easy.
Recording.